Hello again. Today, I'm going to talk about the death of a billion-dollar industry at the hands of a few incompetent developers.
So grab a snack. It's story time.
In the late 90s, a few MMOs like Ultima Online and EverQuest had some basic PvP, and it was good for its time. But the PvE community vastly outweighed the PvP community, and many people, like myself, even got banned for PvPing too much. Then, in 2001, Mythic's Dark Age of Camelot came out, and for the first time on a large scale, PvP was the endgame. Its population exploded. Mythic forecast to GameSpy, which was a thing back then, 30,000 players. 4 days after launch, it had 51,000 players. And keep in mind, there wasn't commercials and ads back then for this kind of stuff. You heard about this kind of game from other gamers. If you weren't a gamer, probably didn't even know it existed. By 2006, it had over 300,000 players in North America and over 100,000 in Europe. Now back then, most people didn't have great gaming PCs, and in fact, gaming PCs weren't very common yet, so these numbers were pretty good for the time. Dark Age of Camelot at its launch had no endgame PvE, unless you consider one quest that took like an hour or so to be endgame PvE. Instead, PvP was the endgame. 3-sided war, 8v8, keeps, relics, the whole nine, on extremely good servers. Yeah, it'd lag if you got hundreds of people in the same spot. There was no amount of server technology that was going to keep that smooth in 2001. Mark Jacobs, Mythic's big boss, to his credit, spent a lot on good servers. Nowadays, I hear he's involved in some sort of drama about his new game, Camelot Unchained, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Now, Dark Age of Camelot did get some PvE endgame after launch. Each realm got an extra zone with a big dragon, and the crowd favorite, the original PvPvE zone, Darkness Falls. This place was one of the best bridges between PvE and PvP I've ever seen, and its format would be copied by numerous other MMOs attempting to recreate its glory to no avail. There's a lot of people who thought they were PvE only, who ended up being thrust into a PvP situation down there, winning it, and deciding to give this whole PvP thing a try. More PvE based expansions were released, but PvP remained the endgame focus. If you didn't PvP, you didn't have any points to spend on stat bonuses and whatnot. Now, I'm not saying PvE wasn't also required, but that's fairly standard across the whole MMO industry for acquisition of gear and leveling up and all that. The 8v8 scene, which drove the game's competitive end, was huge, and stories of certain groups winning certain fights and capturing certain relics and giving the whole realm a stat boost and things like that were common, and drove the creation of countless 8-mans looking to compete. This, however, was only possible because of Mythic's competition-based design choices regarding zerging. There's a design philosophy that Mythic had that's pretty much the crux of this video. It's controversial, but the results speak for themselves. The thing that separated Dark Age of Camelot, which I'm going to call DAOC, because I don't feel like pronouncing all that over and over. The thing that separates DAOC from other competitive MMOs that came afterwards was the ability to tell the customer no. Mythic's customer service reps were the original get good people. You see, casuals, which I'll detail in another video, have a bad habit of not being able to learn from failure. One of the most important philosophies I go by is, if I died, I fucked up. There is always, and I mean always, something I could have done slightly different or better. Now, I'm not saying every fight's winnable. Sometimes you're just gonna die. It happens. But that doesn't mean you couldn't have done it better or taken out a few more of them with you on the way down. Casuals, they don't have this self-awareness. When they die, it's always someone else's fault. The other class was OP, there was lag, or somebody must be cheating. You know, the "dude, you only beat me 'cause my controller broken" kind of shit. It's extremely common. These kind of people, they're not gonna form up an 8-man group for some competitive gameplay. Nah, they're gonna zerg. They want to win. They don't care about teamwork and strategy. They want numbers to win for them. Against keep guards and PvE mobs in general, zerging worked just fine for them, but not against skilled players. Because after getting zerged a number of times, groups began rolling certain classes and speccing in certain ways to be able to bomb these zergs, killing dozens and sometimes hundreds of players within a few seconds, through coordination of area effect and crowd control. There are dozens of tasty zerg bombing videos that still exist from that time period, and I really wish I had been recording back then. So, these casuals that refuse to accept that zerging's what got them killed, a Karen percentage of them call the Mythic customer service or post on the forum to complain about the terrible cheaters, because there's no way that an 8-man killed their 100-man zerg. Nah, it's gotta be cheats. Here's where Mythic shined. Instead of taking these hundreds or thousands of salty reports, Mythic just said, no, get good. Spread out so crowd control doesn't crush you. These people aren't cheating, they're just using the skills in-game better than you are. So rather than stack up some big number of reports on the subject which might inadvertently affect the dev team's competitive decision making, they trashed these reports. Thus, zerg farming became a common thing, and a lot of groups were formed by people in zergs who got tired of getting embarrassed dying in a zerg. DAOC, by the way, is still widely considered, by those who were around at the time, to have been the best PvP MMO and still is to this day. Nowadays, the quality of life features that have become common over the last 20 years make it extremely dated and barely playable, but I gotta say, E-Main and Agramon will always remain my favorite killing grounds. Now let's skip ahead a few years. World of Warcraft pulled away most of the PvE players due to it having no PvP at its launch, but new PvP MMOs were on the horizon. There were a lot, but I'm going to focus on one or two: Warhammer Online and Guild Wars 2. At the launch of Warhammer Online, which was a Mythic entertainment game, a lot of old 8-mans and other groups from other games formed up there because of the potential for competition. It had 3-realm combat, keeps, yada yada. The beta went about how most experienced PvP players expected. There wasn't big crowd control, but at keep doors and choke points and other strategic spots, you could lay down area effect damage and bring down zergs. Everything seemed like it was going just fine. The first major patch for Warhammer was released right around launch time. It was huge, of course, filled with massive amount of bug fixes, class changes, all the normal stuff. But wedged somewhere right in the middle was one single sentence, which went something like, remove the ability to stack area of effect damage skills. I remember everyone in my guild, as well as a massive competitive community, collectively having a moment of silence. They'd fucked it up. Their customer service allowed the huge number of spam reports of statements like, we have 40 people, how could we lose to 4 people? They must be hacking, there's no way. And if this isn't changed, me and my massive Zerg guild are gonna cancel our subscriptions. And then, well, it seems to have gone something like this. Sir, we're getting a massive number of reports about small groups of players killing large groups of players with AoE abilities. What? How? Were they all standing together in one spot or something? Yeah, I guess they were, but, there's just so many reports, and they all threaten to quit if they can't Zerg to win. Well, I have no experience in this subject, or balls, so I guess we're gonna have to nerf AoEs. This is kind of embarrassing. Can we keep this on the down low? Can you just kind of slide it in the patch notes somewhere? Try to minimize this, okay? Skip to 1 month later, 90% of the PvP players have not renewed their subscriptions. With no tools to fight the Zergs, there was no competition to be had here. With the loss of most of the competitive community, the game began its decline and never recovered. It only lasted a few years before its servers were shut down for good. It was a sad time for the PvP MMO industry, and as you can see from this games industry article about it, even the people involved knew it had been sabotaged from within. and were too scared to talk about it even after the project was over. They knew that if they had any hope of landing another job in this industry, that they better not go spilling the beans on their boss. Now, a lot of people blame Mark Jacobs for this, but I don't think that's entirely fair. I've spoken with Mark about this personally, and while he wouldn't say directly that EA's purchase of Mythic resulted in bad decisions getting made, that's pretty much a given considering that EA's fucked over countless studios over the years, which I will get into in another video. Roughly the same thing happened with Guild Wars 2, by the way. The lack of ability to damage zergs other than some arrow carts drove the competitive community away from there quickly. There were a few other MMOs like Age of Conan and Terra Online that claimed to have good PvP but just didn't. The games simply didn't provide the correct environment for PvP to thrive. The PvP community, or RVR or AVA or whatever you people call it now, had been lied to. They had nothing left to play. Groups fractured and broke, and the PvP MMO industry as a whole looked nearly dead. But then, in early 2014, people started talking about a new one, Elder Scrolls Online. During development, it was determined that a PvP endgame could bring in a vast crowd of players that the industry knew existed out there somewhere. DAOC was determined to be the model, because of it being the last big successful PvP MMO. Members of the Dark Age team were brought in to work on it. The marketing campaign to bring in PvPers was extensive and worked very well. Tens of thousands of PvP-focused players flooded the beta server, and the company bragged about the numbers. The game had 3 realms, keeps, relics, the whole kitchen sink. Skeptical, but hopeful, we dove in. This beta, as short as it was, in my opinion, the last good PvP environment to exist. People were ungeared, having had only a few days to level up, but the PvP was solid. Servers were good, though of course could spike a bit when you have hundreds of players around, which is expected, but they were good. My group, as well as numerous other groups, have videos from this time, saved somewhere on Twitch, of some fun 4v Zerg fights and bombing large groups. It was a good time. Unfortunately, it wouldn't last. Launch day approached, and a big patch was dropped. Something painfully expected was buried deep in the notes. It was the weirdest patch note I had ever seen. It said that they wanted to clarify how the AoE system worked. This is not something you see in patch notes. That's because patch notes are for informing people of changes. What it was quite brief, and it essentially just said there was an AoE cap of 6 players. And that they just felt like this was important information, and they really just wanted to get it out there in the patch notes. The PvP community had once again been fucked over. This time, the company didn't even have the balls to admit it. What I found most amazing about this, by the way, was the sheer number of white knights that couldn't possibly fathom of a company lying to them, saying, "Yeah, that sounds about right, 6 people, sure." Despite the fact that these same people were the same ones spamming the same butthurt reports that they shouldn't be able to kill us, we have more people, you gotta change it. The lack of self-awareness is truly astonishing. So all of this had 2 major consequences. 1, the mass exodus of the competitive community once again, for obvious reasons. And 2, the introduction of blob zergs. In a blob zerg, due to the AoE cap, you'd be nearly unkillable, since any AoE would likely hit a different 6 people each time, due to the movement of such a large group. The combination of a loss of all the competitive groups and introduction of ball zergs drove away the majority of the rest of the players. So, about a month or 2 after launch, a review of the server resources were done at the data center they rent servers from. This is done often in the MMO industry to ensure that if they need more, they rent more, or less if they need less. Now, the servers required to make large-scale PvP happen are different from the ones used in the rest of the game. It just requires better technology, more expensive servers. Nothing crazy expensive, but just more expensive than what's required to keep small instances of PvE going. So they discussed the numbers, and the numbers showed that the big PvP zone, Cyrodiil, had lost like 90% of its population, resulting in all the population bars showing low for all instances. This was kind of embarrassing for a game that went so ham on its PvP advertising. There was no PvE endgame. There was no 12-man trials back then. Crafted gear was the best gear, and PvP was the endgame. But it was empty. So they made two decisions. One, to lower the population totals from the population graph so that instead of thousands of players supported, it went down to some amount less than 1,000. This way, even a few hundred players would show a healthy quote-unquote population. And two, they, having much less players, swapped out the expensive servers for cheaper ones. The problem here is that the zone was designed around having a certain quality of server. It simply couldn't handle the zone with weaker servers. They then made the fortunate mistake of admitting that they lowered the population caps in the next upcoming patch notes. This led to widespread criticism about why this was necessary. The average ping had jumped to 150 to 200 plus at any given time, and it had become the norm with these new shit servers. People thought, this is bad, but surely it can't get any worse than this, right? Though they would drop the population caps numerous times in the future, they would never again make the PR mistake of putting it in the patch notes. The PvP players tend to be a more vocal crowd, probably because they've been fucked over so many times. So there was a lot, and I mean a lot, of threads on the ESO forum about this subject. They were, on their way out, at least going to point out how fucked up all of this was. This began one of the heaviest forum moderation ban waves I've ever seen. To this very day, by the way, that forum is widely considered full-on Nazi mod territory. I've seen people get banned for literally anything. I've seen them get banned for discussing this topic, among other things, because their view of the forum is its potential PR for new players. They quickly learned from other forums that they can use the ambiguous term baiting to ban anyone for literally anything they want. Your opinion differs from someone else's? You must be baiting them, tee-hee. Permaban. It's gross, but you'll find the baiting excuse used widely nowadays on most forums. So, sometime later, after lowering the population cap and implementing these new shit servers, another assessment was done, and of course, most of the remaining PvP players had left. So they full-on swapped the Cyrodiil servers out for the same cheap ones that were used for the PvE side of the game. This resulted in massive, and I mean massive lag, where often abilities won't fire for 5+ seconds at a time. You got 250 plus ping, health bars desync, random load screens during combat, crashes to desktop literally multiple times an hour, etc. It's honestly the worst I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of PvP MMOs. The lag there is just unplayable. I do not know how the remaining people handle it. I give it a try every few months for giggles, and every single time I am disgusted and leave within just a few minutes. So for quick explanation, what I mean when I say ball groups, they evolved from zergs into stack-on-crown tight stacks. Take advantage of that aforementioned 6-player AoE cap. The server itself would buckle under the weight of these 30 to 50 plus player ball groups, and they were practically unkillable. The amount of AoE heals which weren't capped, and the inability to hit even the same 6 people over and over due to movement, ensured that they were the new meta. You either joined a ball zerg or you fucked off. By the way, I spent about 30 minutes trying to find some pictures of ball zergs to show you for this video, and despite it having been the core of Cyrodiil's gameplay for years, I can't seem to find pictures or videos of it. It's almost as if the people who are doing it kinda know how fucking embarrassing it is and don't want to record themselves doing it. Shocking, I know. So, at some point, some hero stepped in as ZeniMax and said, "Hey boss, our PvP is embarrassing." what can we do? So, this was it. The one big chance to step up and recognize their mistake and say, oh, shit, PvP players all left when we told them about the AoE cap that we said had always been there, tee-hee. Now, wanting the game to be successful, the correct thing to say should have been, yeah, we fucked up, we're gonna change it back to the original PvP. You know, the one we advertised to you that you played in the beta before you all quit at the same time. But no, the ego of a certain person up there at ZeniMax, whom I won't name, wouldn't allow that. The other devs, the ones who actually gave a shit about the game, then made a proposition to him about a new ability called Magica Detonation that would, by design, only destroy these ball zergs. It would do some AoE damage, but this damage would increase 25% for each player within a few meters. This meant that if they were stacked up that tightly, they were gonna all die. This would hopefully spread players out and bring back competition. The boss, though, when presented with this new ability proposal, said, yeah, okay, but the AoE caps stay. This meant that this new ability wasn't gonna do shit. At this point, the devs knew nothing was gonna change here, so they finally sacked up and told him what was up. That seriously, the thing everybody else had been saying for years, AoE caps is what killed Cyrodiil, and it was never gonna have any chance of success until you let this go. The boss, finally starting to understand that it was kinda his fault, his ego was not gonna allow this to happen, so he said, okay, you can nerf AoE caps a little bit, but they are staying. The result was 6 people take full damage, the next 6 take half, the next 6 take 25%, yada yada yada, but AoE caps must stay. What a fucking asshole. Having made some small degree of progress, the dev team went to work on it, knowing it wouldn't work, but it was a step in the right direction. It was implemented, and mostly unused of course, and the blob zergs continued to roll around Cyrodiil, crashing the server left and right and destroying any chance of competitive PvP. One of the saddest things, by the way, in all of this is that a lot of these ball zergers actually thought that this stack on crown meta and spam 1112, 1113, 111 shit was competitive PvP. It's all they knew, and because everyone else just died instantly when they came around, they literally were bragging about zerging, something I never thought I would see, and something I'm sure they look back on with embarrassment, but maybe not. Self-awareness is not common these days. Sometime later, once again the devs pleaded with their boss that this shit wasn't working, no change had happened, AoE caps were still the problem. You know, the thing they've been saying for years. Finally, rightfully embarrassed, the boss finally said, yeah, okay, fine. Get rid of the AoE caps, whatever. Nobody cares about PvP anyway. Cyrodiil's dead. Glad we're not wasting money on the good servers anymore. What a piece of shit. Speaking of, he then even downgraded the PvE servers, which caused 12-man trial groups to experience the same lag that PvP players have been suffering for years, resulting in a huge backlash, as many trial guilds were having wipes due to lag beyond their control. I also want to point out that they changed their in-game latency meter because they knew it was embarrassing to always be in the red. So now it goes up to 300 before turning red. Have you ever played any other game where the latency is considered by the game to be okay at 296 ping? Because I haven't. That kind of ping is so far into the unplayable territory that I cannot imagine that being okay with anyone. And by the way, the investors and people making financial decisions probably did and still do set aside money for the servers for this AAA MMO. That money's going somewhere. If I had to guess, it's lining a certain somebody's pocket, as it has been for years. So, with the AoE caps finally removed, most of these ball zergs broke into smaller groups, afraid to get embarrassed by a 4-man, but it was too late. 99-ish% of the game's population of tens of thousands had left, years ago. Currently, the server can't even handle more than like 15, 20 people fighting in the same area before it has a meltdown and pings jump from 250 to 999. And some of you are going to think I am exaggerating. I assure you, I am not. The PvP population that's left are mostly the new accounts trying it out, only to be quickly disgusted by the ping and skills not firing and leave quickly. The vets who still RVR there must have the most extreme server-related PTSD ever, but I can respect their commitment to the PvP game, as there's not really an alternative to it out there. They have put up with a nearly unplayable environment for years, and that takes some serious willpower. Another thing that points out the obvious is that twice a year for 1 week they have a PvP event, during which time they do a large server maintenance before and after, in which they literally rent better servers for a week and then drop them back to the cheap shit afterwards. The result of this is that for about 2 weeks a year, Cyrodiil actually functions, and pretty decently. Not as good as the original expensive servers, but they won't be going back to those regardless of how many millions of dollars they farm in from Crown Store cosmetics, which is unfortunately the focus of their art team nowadays. So about a year or so ago, after the loss of about 90% of the streamers that repped their game, who frequently talked about the unplayable lag in this quote-unquote AAA MMO, once again embarrassment was kicking the boss's ass and he was faced with two options. A, either admit that he personally, being the one in charge, had intentionally caused all this and cost his company tens of millions of potential dollars in revenue by sinking the endgame of the most popular MMO on the market, or B, come up with a new lie. And can you guess which option this piece of shit picked? Yep, that's right, he picked option B. So, ESO announced they would be taking some time to focus on performance. They stated that they had no idea why their servers couldn't handle the game anymore, tee-hee. There must be some bugs in the software, they said, that somehow only affect the latency. And they'd be spending 3 to 6 months or however long was required to do testing, quote-unquote, in Cyrodiil, which involved removing of AoE heals, removing of AoE skills entirely, making groups smaller, removing proc gear, etc. Literally anything to avoid admitting that it was the servers. A lot of the remaining PvP population, which is already tiny, said fuck you, and refused to participate in this shit, resulting in the PvP population dropping even further. Now, logically, with less than 100 or so players in the zone total, any results they would get would be skewed anyway, but none of that really mattered. The devs knew they were full of shit, and the players did too. The tests are over now, I think. They resulted in 0 performance increase, and Cyrodiil remains unplayable. So here we are today. The MMO industry has had every nail firmly hammered down into its coffin, the door's been sealed, and we're dragging the box to the graveyard. But on the way, an accurate analysis of what happened is important. It's not that the MMO market consists of only 1 or 2% PvP players now, it's that they all left, and for damn good reason. Because no games are offering the competitive environment with servers that can handle a fight. I gotta point out, though I really don't want to at this point, that ESO still has the biggest potential for successful PvP of any MMO on the market. They could announce tomorrow that they are upgrading all servers and raising the population caps, and if that turned out to be true, they would see a massive influx of tens of thousands of players. It's not gonna happen though. Ego is powerful shit. It's stronger than the need for success at this point. Admission of failure doesn't look good, and it's a hard thing to say to investors. But you know what's easy to say to investors? Well, we tried. We built Cyrodiil after DAOC's design. We did everything, but PvP players, they just can't be pleased. They all left. What a huge waste of time building Cyrodiil was. Let's never do that again. That's right. The message from ZeniMax to the PvP industry is, don't waste your time. What a piece of shit. I will quickly mention Amazon's New World. At the reveal of their game, it was full PvP, and it got massive attention. Everyone perked up an ear in the hopes that maybe with Amazon's money and a PvP environment, we might actually get to see a new PvP MMO with potential. It took less than a week. The PvE only crowd raged and demanded and pre-threatened not to pre-buy. PvE crowd's angst against the PvP crowd is something I will cover in another video, but I'm sure you get the basics of it. Amazon, having no experience and no balls, caved like their predecessors before them and said, whoa, whoa, we designed it around being a PvP game, but if so many of you hate that idea, then I guess we can change that, even though it's kind of the fucking fundamental pillar of the game, but okay. So now, there will be no world PvP in New World, because nobody's gonna stay flagged for PvP unless they're actively about to fight a specific person or group. This is not the first time games have tried flag PvP. Why would you leave yourself flagged when running around an open world? That would be dumb. Flagged-based PvP is garbage, and it's been proven so many times. The result was a widespread sigh, having seen this stupid shit happen so many times before. Now, you'll notice that nobody gives a shit about New World, not even the PvE crowd. They weren't actually going to play the game designed around PvP at its core. They just didn't like the idea of a pure PvP environment existing, and knew that Amazon simply didn't have the experience to say no. The big takeaway here is that PvP can be popular. Things like the recent popularity of Fortnite, PUBG, Warzone, League, Dota, etc. show what we already knew, that humans are by nature competitive, and that if you provide them with the right atmosphere, you'll have a prosperous game. FPS and RTS is unfortunately the only places where competition's thriving right now, but that's not because there's not millions of competitive MMO players out there, it's because they have nothing to play. They're out there, waiting for an MMO with a good combat system to make the correct environment available. We want to give you our money, we want to play your game, but we cannot if you do not allow the environment required for competition. I hope that this helps shed some light on the slow, painful assassination of the whole PvP MMO scene. May it rise again someday. Thanks for stopping by. Let's do this again soon.